Unexplained things astronauts saw in outer space. When astronauts are selected to go into space, they not only undergo physical tests, but also psychological tests, as unexpected situations can arise in a mission to orbit the Earth. Therefore, when astronauts talk about strange and unexplained phenomena they encounter in space, it arouses our respect and interest. Despite all the preparations, going on a space trip means encountering the unexplored and unexpected. Many astronauts have witnessed incomprehensible phenomena that cannot be explained scientifically. Their stories raise many questions and make us wonder what really happens in space. Soviet astronauts saw something strange. In 1981, cosmonaut Vladimir Kovalenko witnessed an unusual phenomenon aboard the Salyut orbital space station. He saw an object in front of him, elliptically shaped, which rotated in the direction of the flight, after which there was an explosion of golden light, and two beautiful golden spheres appeared. Kovalenko noticed that these objects never returned. Astronauts generally do not disclose such observations, but Kovalenko spoke openly about what he saw at a press conference in Moscow after his return to Earth. He shared his observations to generate interest and try to unravel the mystery of the phenomenon. Apollo 10 astronauts heard alien music in their headphones. In 1969, American astronauts were on the dark side of the moon when they heard a strange sound in their headphones that lasted an hour. What it was is still a mystery. There are versions that the sound was due to radio interference between spacecraft, but the three experienced astronauts who participated in the mission described it as space music. This sound could have arisen from a variety of causes, including the effects of cosmic rays on electronics and other effects. But it still remains unknown what was really behind this mysterious sound. Yuri Gagarin's melody. During Yuri Gagarin's flight, a mysterious fact occurred. He heard a strange melody that followed him throughout the flight. A few years later, he heard the same melody on the radio and learned that it was a new composition by an ensemble of electronic instruments conducted by Vyacheslav Meshcherin. At the time when Gagarin flew into space, the term electronic music was not yet widely used. I wonder what triggered these sounds during Gagarin's flight, and why they were associated with a composition written only a few years afterwards. That remains a mystery. The first Chinese astronaut told that he heard a mysterious knocking on the door in space. In 2003, Yang Luo became the first Chinese astronaut to go into space aboard the Shenzhou 5 spacecraft. During his mission, he heard a strange sound that resembled a crackling clatter, and he described it as a sound similar to an iron bucket banging against a wooden hammer. However, given that space is a vacuum, this raised doubts among scientists, who believe that sound cannot be transmitted without a medium such as air or water. But on subsequent Shenzhou missions, other Chinese astronauts also heard the sound. There is a version that the sound was caused by the peculiarities of the ship's design and represents the sound of the spacecraft's shell clenching. It is interesting to note that only the Chinese astronauts aboard the Shenzhou hear this sound. This story raises many questions and makes us think about what unusual phenomena can happen in space that we still do not know about. Astronauts see strange lights. In 2005, astronaut Leroy Chiao commanded the International Space Station for nearly 7 months. While installing antennas 370 kilometers above Earth, he witnessed something he could not explain. He saw a line of light moving in the sky, which seemed very strange to him. He later commented on the event and shared his impression. Mystical orbit. What astronauts saw and heard during their work on the ISS. In space, according to psychiatrists, people's consciousness can give out hallucinations. Once the first cosmonaut of planet Earth, Yuri Gagarin, misspoke that if he had been allowed, he could have told many interesting things about his flight. Now, astronauts are reluctant, but they admit that they meet unusual phenomena in space that have no reasonable explanation. Federal press collected stories of those who flew to the ISS about unusual balls, angels, barking dogs, and transformations into animals to share with readers. Angels from the ISS. Soviet cosmonauts in 1985 reported to the control center on Earth that a strange glowing orange cloud suddenly appeared overboard the Salyut 7 space station. After it dissipated, the crew saw 7 human figures through the porthole, but of gigantic stature with halos over their heads and large wings behind their backs. When the astronauts returned after completing the program, they were strictly forbidden to mention what they had seen. a UFO as big as a finger. Former Soviet cosmonaut Vladimir Kovalenok told a Rosaviakosmos press conference 5 years ago that he had observed an object of incomprehensible origin the size of a human finger on the Salyut orbital station. After a short flight, the finger exploded right in front of the cosmonaut's eyes, and then smoke fell from the object, and it split into 2 parts connected by a small bridge. According to Kovalenok, after that, the object disappeared, and the collapse of the UFO coincided with a powerful radioactive burst, which detected sensors. In 1991, cosmonaut Musa Manarov on the Mir station watched the module with the new crew approaching. According to his story, some object resembling an antenna abruptly separated from this module. It was captured on camera, but has not yet been identified. In the summer of 2019, astronaut Ivan Wagner on the IS photographed strange objects that look like satellites. It confused me that I had never before seen satellites flying parallel courses at the same distance at the same speed and in groups. Wagner said, responding to a question via video link from the IS. Giant people on Earth. Cosmonaut Vitaly Sebastianov is convinced that from outer space he could see the port of Sochi and even a small 2-story house where he lived. His colleague Yuri Glazkov claimed that flying over Brazil, he saw a thin strip of highway and a bus passing along it. And Georgy Grechko said he photographed an ice floe and a huge man in Mongolia. We were flying over Mongolia, and suddenly we saw an image of a man. It's 100 or even 200 kilometers in size. The head, overcoat, and legs are clearly visible. Yuri Romanenko and I, who was flying with him at the time, called him the Snowman. Because it was the snowman, because it was the snow that created the giant, recalled the legendary cosmonaut. A dog barking in the sky. Cosmonaut Vladislav Volkov, who died in 1971 while returning from orbit, said a few years before his last flight that in the middle of the night on the space station, he distinctly heard a dog barking. I thought it was the voice of our Laika, who died in orbit. Then I distinctly heard the crying of a child, and some voices. It is impossible to explain it all. To feel, yes, declared the space conqueror, the invisible behind and transformation into animals. Professor Kirill Busuf, a candidate of physico-mathematical sciences, told how a Russian cosmonaut confessed to him that in orbit sometimes there is an effective presence. Someone unseen watches the person with a heavy gaze, and then there's a whisper at the subconscious level with something like these words, "You came here too early and wrong. Trust me, for I am your ancestor, son. You should not be here. Come back to Earth. Do not break the laws of the Creator." Kirill Butasov relays what he heard the cosmonaut in a conversation with Komsomolskaya Pravda. Sergei Krichevsky recalled that, according to his senses, at some point he got out of his usual appearance and turned into an animal. And his colleague shared with him that he turned into a real dinosaur, walking on an unknown planet, stepping over an abyss. At the same time, he stressed that he could feel the horny plates on his spine rising out of him, the claws digging into the soil. Psychiatrists who have worked with astronauts claim that people in space are prone to hallucinations that arise from the effects of the external environment. Weightlessness, high radiation, magnetic field. Such a fragile Earth. Many astronauts have stated that when looking at our planet from space, you can see that there are no boundaries on Earth. Any geopolitical barriers that exist on the world map are not marked in space. When looking at Earth from space, it is felt that humanity is a single race, and all conflicts on Earth on such a scale are insignificant. Astronauts also note such phenomenon as fragile Earth. In space, our planet's atmosphere is very thin, and the Earth has no solid foundation. Give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel.